in formal buildings. So over to you, Jenna.
Thank you so much. I'm going to speak as loud as I can. Is this fine? I can go louder. Okay. Good evening, everyone. As stated, my name is Jenna Larangera, and I'm an historical archaeology master's student at the University of Cape Town. I study the documented history of the last 300 years with specific focus on South Africa in the 19th and 20th centuries. I will be presenting on my master's research, which includes the digitization of a Corbelled building site and how this can further historical research of similar sites. I gave this presentation last year at a SAPA. If you watched it then, don't worry. I have added and changed it a bit, so you won't have to sit through the exact same thing. Before I discuss my research, as well as the digital aspects of the project, I would first like to explain Corbelled buildings for anyone who is not familiar with them. Corbelled buildings are a type of vernacular architecture, which simply put is the utilization of local materials and resources to build a structure without formal plans. Corbelling, which is seen throughout the world, is an act of laying and overlapping stone to create a domed or beehive-like structure. Each layer of stone is placed more inward, resulting in the dome shape. The technique was finished off with a capstone to close the structure's roof. You'll see a little bit later on. In South Africa, the Corbelled building style emerged in the early 19th century in a small part of the Nama Karoo. The limited area is due to availability of stone found in the Karoo supergroup, which are primarily used as building materials. These are mudstone, siltstone, and sandstone. Vegetation, especially trees in the area, were sparse, which is why stone was used to build these structures. Pictured here, over there, is Choras 1. Not sure if anyone's familiar with it. It is a Corbelled building next to rectangular structures on a farm of the same name. A little fun history about Choras is that it has houses from different areas on the land. My supervisor, who unfortunately cannot join us today, Dr. Vuyiswa Lupuwana, researched the buildings and wrote about Corbelled buildings, a Victorian home, and a mid-century home, all in close proximity to one another. This was an active area with an old freeway passing through, which is why there were so many houses before that freeway was moved. Back to Corbelled buildings. In 1959, James Walton, a vernacular architecture enthusiast, was tasked by the Commission for the Preservation of Natural and Historical Monuments, Relics, and Antiques to determine if the Corbelled buildings in the Northern Cape held any significance. This research was established as there was a shift towards promoting and preserving Afrikaner history after the centenary celebration of the Great Trap. Walton surveyed 16 Corbelled buildings, with 5 structures being declared as national monuments after submitting his report. Following Walton's work a few decades later, the Vernacular Architecture Society of South Africa recorded over 200 Corbelled buildings in this part of the Nama Karoo. Although this number seems large, the buildings are a finite resource, and many are at risk of collapsing, which has led historical archaeologists to these sites. Additionally, the histories associated with Corbelled buildings, Additionally, past and incorrect observations of the inhabitants only being of European descent prompted further research. Corbelled buildings are extremely useful when studying the Northern Cape region in South Africa's historical past, as they exhibit diverse histories that include creolization and interaction of track Boers and indigenous groups. Additionally, the histories associated with the Corbelled buildings can help historical archaeologists like me understand a bit more about previous inhabitants of the houses and the lands. For example, groups like Vuyiswa. These were laborers, often farmers, who lived on and worked on a piece of land owned by a wealthier person. Now, before I continue with a little bit of a taste of my research, I would like to familiarize you all with some images of Corbelled buildings to help you visualize what I've been describing. Yeah. Here you can see the different types of Corbelled buildings found in the Nama Karoo region. I'm going to point to 2 very recognizable ones if you know the area. This includes Steermansfontein on the top left, which has been a guest house since the 1990s. Another building right over here, if you've been to Carnarvon, It is in the town and it is rebuilt next to the Carnarvon Museum. So this one over here was actually taken from its original farm, disassembled and reassembled next to the museum. These images give you all an idea of what Corbelled buildings are, which leads us to the site, Rondawels, a Corbelled building complex. The site is a quick 7-hour trip from Cape Town to the Northern Cape and is located between Carnarvon and Loxton on a private farm named Inhabitants. The farm has a subsection called Gansvlei, and this is where Rondawels sits. Notably, Rondawels sits right next to a vlei, I'll show you a little bit later, that would have been more active at the time of occupancy. When we excavated, it was quite dry. From material analysis, we can roughly date the site to the late 19th century and the early 20th century. Again, I will elaborate on this. The site was excavated in November of 2023 by my supervisors, another master's student, and my friend, Gemma Peretti, and myself. As we can see, this is the landscape. So when I was talking about building resources, there's hardly any wood, the vegetation is sparse, it is quite arid, and it's a harsh landscape over here. As you can see, Simon and Pat over there. Again, the landscape. And what's interesting here is how the buildings fade into the background. So a lot of people think of Corbelled buildings with the white on the outside, and we are still not yet sure if this had all the white. There are some remnants of it, but it's quite cool that now that the years have passed by, it is going back to nature. Yeah. Rondawels is an interesting site, as it is a Corbelled, it is, yes, it is, Nigel, as it is a Corbelled building complex rather than a standalone building, or a Corbelled building attached to another structure like Horas. Rondawels has a mixture of Corbelled buildings, as seen by Nigel Armstrong's meticulous diagram to the right over here. We are currently assuming that the complex was occupied by more than one family due to the connected nature and the number of buildings. There is a round-based Corbelled on the far left. The Corbells to the right are then square or rectangular based. With a complex like this, one must look at the Corbells and their additions to determine chronology or sequence. Based on previous research, predominantly by Pat Kramer, the round-based Corbelled building probably came first. Then the larger rectangular-based Corbelled, and apologies, and as it has a domed roof, and then the additions over here. The large tube-based buildings have dome roofs, so the round one over here and this one over here, and those are the domed bee-like structure ones, whereas the additions have flat roofs over here. There is a little bit of doming over here, you'll see a little bit later, but it is a predominantly flat roof as it isn't supported like these ones with all the stones. And it is assumed that a piece of corrugated metal or something similar would have acted like a roof on the flat ones, the square ones with the flat roofs. Due to the Corbelled building techniques, we can say that the additions to either side of the rectangular large base Corbelled were built at the same time as the larger Corbelled, as there are doors going into each addition from the main building over here. This could not be done afterwards, as the Corbelled structure would collapse if stones are removed to make a door or a window. The structures at Rondawels, like their Corbelled building counterparts elsewhere, have architectural features like stone lintels for the windows and doors, niches or alcoves for storage, and interior wooden beams. As mentioned, when I conversed with Pat, these wooden beams and metal beams, which I will show you, would often be used for hanging items and could act as a curtain rod to separate the Corbelled building into distinct sections when people were living in them. The bottom image here is quite interesting, as it clearly shows the different additions with distinct divisions on the back side of the building. The differing stone and methods used could either indicate different builders with individual styles or a change in corbelling techniques when these additions were made. The structural elements of Rondawels are important components in my master's research. Let me just show them here. So we have lintels, all stone lintels. This is the main round one. This is one of the additions to the left. And these are the niches and alcoves that I was talking about. So when it is roofed, when it is closed, there are similar ones in the closed off structures. They would put candles, their little things. I think I have another picture of how we used it. Over there, little storage. We actually had lunch in this corbel every day. And this is what I was talking about with the metal beams. They're sometimes wooden. So you could have metal ones with a little wire across to hang things. So these were all still in there. And then this is the bottom view looking up of the main house with the capstone. So sometimes it is one main stone. This looks like a few, or ones that have cracked. But yeah, it is really beautiful looking up. This leads me to my research, microscale perspectives of rural pastoral economies, an investigation of the late 19th and 20th century Karoo corbelled house dwellings in Loxton and Carnarvon, Northern Cape. So that's my individual research, but today I'm presenting on the digitisation. But in my thesis or dissertation, I'm looking at the buildings, their associated middens, and the inhabitants. A microscale analysis focuses on the individuals and everyday life. At Rondawels, we are specifically looking at family units and how these families potentially contributed to the socio-economic climate of the rural Northern Cape. Subsequently, I'm discussing the relationship of these occupants with their lived environment, as well as the broader landscape of Loxton and Carnarvon. This is partially done by analysing archival evidence. However, because corbelled buildings are under research, there is little written evidence pertaining to them, as stated by Caroline Hancock and Pat Kramer in their respective theses. Luckily, I had Nigel Armstrong, Kathy Schulz, and Pat Kramer helping me, and we found a decent amount of evidence of the sites. We found a few wills from the owners of Eenderfontein, the main farm where Rondawels sits, as well as the surrounding farms, as well as a comprehensive inventory of Eenderfontein. And it actually was showing that Eenderfontein was quite wealthy, which is quite interesting. Here we go. The surveyor diagrams and maps, here we go, of the farms and their subdivisions helped establish when Rondawels was active. And from this, we can assume that the farm and site were occupied in the late 19th century. Additionally, a military map found recently by Pat from the early 20th century noted Rondawels on the map, which means that the site was still active at the turn of the century, so in the 1900s. Ceramic and glass analyses further supported this time of occupation. The excavated ceramics assemblage is indicative of a late 19th century assemblage because of the abundance of refined earthenwares and British porcelain. The assemblage can almost be described as monotonous or boring, not by me. The ceramics had little decoration that was a bit questionable in terms of taste. There was even a new term coined by Simon in the field for the decorated ware, near or nightmare in red. It was really not a pretty looking ceramic. The glass assemblage indicates the time of occupancy too, with oily, alcohol, medicine, and perfume bottles being there, and these were made and popularized from the 19th century onwards. There is a large number of solarized glass. This is just because I think solarized glass is pretty. This is from exposure to UV light and how the chemicals in the glass react to UV light. And I'll show you a little bit later. That's the pretty pieces of purple glass, and you'll see a little bit of yellow glass in almost every square, because as we know, the Karoo is quite hot, and the UV rays are quite hectic there. Yeah, so I have a few more pictures of the assemblage. So this is from Gully 2, which I'm going to speak about in a little bit. And this is just to show the ceramics. That one's nice, sure, but these ones are a little bland. It's because it is the British occupancy. We don't have that Asian import where it's not these bright colors. Also, we do have to remember that the people living here were probably babe winners, from what I chatted about. It's assumed. And they didn't have the means to buy these beautiful wares with all these colors. So that's what we were getting from the middens. Again, so this is solarized glass. It's not the actual pattern, it's just very pretty, I think. And then more of the glass, again, not so fun, I guess, the colors over here. And for those unfamiliar, when you clean glass and ceramics, you use baby toothbrushes and just a little bit of water so that you don't mess them up. Great. So these are some interesting finds that I have here. Simon Hall often says in my writing feedback that I mustn't give everything away too early. So everyone will just have to read my dissertation to find out more afterwards. However, I'm showing you some pieces here that I found interesting when I was analyzing the excavated material. Our own Gemma Poretti over there found a ceramic doll's foot on the surface layer of the excavated midden over here. To me, this is quite a personal find, as it indicates that children were present on the site. In the past, the histories of women and children are overlooked, which is what I aim to combat as a historical archaeologist. The second interesting find is on the bottom left here, is the base of a John Walker and Sons whiskey bottle from Kilmarnock, which indicates that there was trade even in the interior. And even though Rondawels is so far away from established main roads, they were still receiving things from trade routes. Lastly, a medicine bottle from B.G. Lennon and Co., which is now Aspen Holdings, a multinational pharmaceutical company. I just thought it was cool. May not have any relevance. These three finds exhibit everyday lives, which are often left unexplored when looking at the site through a macro lens. So through a large lens, looking at everything, quite vaguely. And that's why we need to look at things through a micro lens, through micro perspectives. They tell a story of people living on the margins of a rural economy, of the everyday lives. Now that you have a little bit of an idea of my research, let us now move on to a very important part of this presentation. Digitally recording Rondawels, what you came here for. Oh, apologies. There we go. On the last few days of our excavation, we were joined by the main authors of this digital work, Roshan Berta, Bruce McDonald, and Ralph Schroeder. I will be presenting their work as I was involved in it. Roshan, Bruce, and Ralph captured images of the site using a DA50 Nikon camera and a DJI Phantom drone. Additionally, a terrestrial 3D laser scanner was used to capture the site. Once the images and scans were obtained, they were combined and processed to create the results that you are about to see. Hold on to your socks. There we go. There we go. This is one of the 3D models that the team created. The model showed the detailed rendering of the outer and inner elements of the Corbelled complex. As seen when zooming in, each stone can be identified in detail. Architectural details that I mentioned earlier are fully rendered here. You can see the additions and the several Corbelled buildings, as well as some collapsed and dilapidated sites. So this in here is quite collapsed, you'll see a little bit later. In addition to this Corbelled complex model, here is a 3D rendering of individual elements of the excavation. This is gully erosion 2. I showed you a little bit of the assemblage earlier, because gully erosion 1 was not exciting at all. So this one's a bit more fun. The excavated area contains ceramic, glass, and a mud brick, which is contested by Pat Kramer. So don't bring it up. Pat doesn't think it is a mud brick. We do. It's over there. But we do have it in the department if anyone wants to come see. But almost a full dinner plate was found here, as seen by the refined earthenware sherd over there with the blue lines. So underneath that was literally almost a full plate. We have assumed that heavy rains created this gully, as well as many others in the area, and the rain pushed surface material into this one section. So this is just a few meters from the main round Corbelled building, the one that we assume to be the oldest. We think that heavy rains that do hit the area when it is dry creates erosion. That's why we call it gully erosion 2, and created a bit of a circular motion over here. And everything was collected in there. Yeah. The last of the 3D models is a cross-section of a dense layer, which helped me immensely as my cross-section drawings are really not that great. In the layer, you can see several faunal remains in detail. I'm going to zoom in now. So here, over there. The cross sections of the excavations aren't just pretty to look at or fun to play with. You can measure elements on the models too. So Roshan, Bruce, and Ralph ensured that when I got home from the excavation, I can still go back to these models and measure the individual elements, as we were good archaeologists and covered the site when we left because it was on private land. Okay. The next result is an array of photography methods. This includes aerial photography, ground level photography, and panoramas. These high-resolution images of aerial photographs have been overlaid with contour lines, not this one, apologies, and features to create orthophotos of the site. It can be seen how isolated Rondawels is from main road. So this is just a little farm track over here. The main farm of Inhabitants is back all the way over here, and we came in through here. This was the flay I was mentioning. It was probably a bit greener back then, and they had a little bit of a water well situation over there with one green tree. But yes, it's extremely isolated. It took us 30 to 45 minutes every day on the track to get to the site from the gate. So these sort of images can really help us, visualize that, the actual houses as well as their broader landscapes. Here we go. To the left is a closer view of Rondawels, which helps when determining chronology and sequence of the complex. So to reiterate, round-based dome structure, rectangular or square-based dome structure, the additions, and then this one over here, that's kind of in over there. Here one can clearly see the structure and the additions, as well as scars on the land from previous smaller structures, like over here, that are actually in Nigel and Pat's diagrams that they shared with me. To the right are two panoramic images. The top image shows the kitchen, and the bottom image shows the larger rectangular-based building. These panoramas help visualize the entire building instead of segmented images. I may be biased, but my favorite result from the digitization is the virtual tour, as it makes me feel like I'm back on site eating Marmite sandwiches in the Corbelled building. This tour allows the viewer to take a detailed walkthrough experience of Rondawels, while also providing an idea of what the landscape looks like. Additionally, the virtual tour explores the collapsed parts of the buildings that are difficult or unsafe for someone to enter. These areas need to be studied, whether I can enter them or not. We're going to go into one now. So the tour allows me to do this. So mainly Roshan and Bruce and Ralph went into the collapsed areas because it was quite scary with all the stones over there. Yeah, so this is where we had lunch every day in here. The last result is a number of close-up high-resolution images. This is a cross-section of the dense layer I mentioned on the 3D model slide. These images show us the stratigraphy and other elements that could have been missed with the naked eye. The cross-section captured here is especially important as it is believed that there was a dumping episode of fauna in this area, and a few bothered bones can be seen here. So this is the same as the 3D model, just in more detail. So what I say with the dumping episode, the stratigraphy of Rondawels isn't deep at all. We think that whoever was living there was eating in abundance and was just dumping things. So this assumptions that we are still going through as I do my thesis. But it's important to note that with this very large number of faunal remains that we had, the ceramics and glass were in amongst this. So it looked as if people just dumped it, capped it with a few stones, and then left and repeated that a few times. So that's what I mean by a dumping episode. So how do these digital results enhance the studies of past rural pastoral economies in the Nama Karoo region of the Northern Cape? First, we now have better access to the remote site that is on private land. I can work on the archaeological material in my lab while consulting the models and images. For example, I can look at the location and size of some domestic stock kraals in the area, which I could not see from the ground when on site. It also allows me to access the detailed cross sections that I mentioned, as well as my on-site drawings. So I use those in conjunction. Secondly, the recording of the site furthers studies of under-researched histories of groups such as the underclass, and rural pastoralists who moved into the interior of South Africa. As mentioned, these histories are not often recorded in written documents. By exploring the physical elements and documenting what we find, historical archaeologists can make sense of the inhabitants of these few unique Corbelled buildings in this area. And this is what my research focuses on. The digitization also allows archaeologists and heritage agencies to manage the buildings. These buildings are a finite resource that are naturally degrading. The degradation can be tracked, assessed, and hopefully maintained, although many are still on private land. Due to the land not being accessible by the public, people can view and virtually visit the site via the online material on repositories such as Sketchfab. And you can all do that today. If you search up Rondawels on Sketchfab, you can go take a look at the 3D models. The last point I would like to make is that there are future projects coming up in the years to come and to record more Corbelled buildings and their subsequent sites. This will help when making comparisons between buildings of similar structure and histories, and will further the studies on Corbelled buildings, which has only seen a rise in the last decade. I must note that although we are the first to record and digitize the Rondawels site, as mentioned earlier, we are not the first to digitize heritage resources in South Africa. ACT Heritage has documented several other Corbelled buildings in the same area. CTS Heritage and the Rock Art Portal have used virtual tours for rock art sites as well. I would like to acknowledge the following people. So my supervisors, Dr. Vuyiswa Lupuwana, Professor Simon Hall, and Patricia Kramer, Roshan Berta, Bruce McDonald, and Rolf Schroeder, as they allow me to still present on work that they are involved in, Tini and Anmar Dumas, who are the owners of Enderfontein, Nigel Armstrong and Kathy Schulz for the help at the archives, the Western Cape Archives and Record Services, Gemma for being on the dig with me, and Brass Funding, who funds me. Thank you so much for having me. I really feel honored to be presenting today. Thank you. Short and sweet, because it was only 10 minutes for a SAPA, so I had to really make it a little bit longer. But questions, yeah. Oh, thank you.
On top.
Am I? Okay, good. Yes.
Just
Yes. So the floor of the main Corbelled building, actually, I might have a picture of this. It was actually covered just in sand because of how much dirt had gotten in. Let me see. There are stones around. So there are stones when you come in as little bits of steps, and then it is mainly just dirt. There are, I don't know how to share this one. I have a few here, but there are some with stone as the base. Yes, so it varies.
Yeah. First, chosen plan a number of structures, which are also rectangular, and at the end it's circular.
Yes.
Is that like the Corbelled building or the Corbelled over the square shape of number?
So a Corbelled building is just the dome shape. So it can have a square base, a rectangular base, a round base. The act of corbelling, or using that term, is just building it up to that dome structure. So that is a Corbelled. Doesn't matter the base. Yes. Yeah. So that's the thing. So yeah, historical archaeology is the archaeology of more of the written past, the documented past. I say it's a lot of the archaeology of the colonial past, because that's when documents first started coming out in Southern Africa, which is what I study. Archaeology as a whole, just as a study of humans, their remains, what we leave behind. Everything is historical, technically. Yes, it is history. We just use the term historical to differentiate us, as it is a more recent history, a more recent archaeology, than say something like isotopes or the Stone Age, things like that, if that makes sense. So it's more the documented past. Yes.
Is there any, they just, how did they get there? Buildings forward, people who came from the sea.
So people came from the Cape Colony. So when track Boers and farmers moved from the rule of the Cape Colony into the interior, they moved to go farm on the land that was given to them sometimes by the Crown. So it was far from the coast up in the Northern Cape. Let me get the. So that move has to do with frontiers, all of that history. I didn't cover that here. That's in my lit review. But movement from the Cape into the interior is how Corbelled buildings were made. And as I said, there's only the stones there to build Corbelled buildings. You can't build it with timber, things like that you would, say, in Newlands. You have to use what is found on the landscape to build that vernacular architecture. It is a long way to come, yes. So there are also assumptions and ideas and histories associated with indigenous peoples of the area. And we often think that when two groups came together, when the colonials met indigenous people, that there was, it was just like this, but people were sharing ideas, although some people couldn't speak the same language, you would say, you watch other people build things, you watch other inhabitants of the land. So it is through learned history and sharing that they got the stones and looked at all that. So it wasn't just a sudden thing of, this is mudstone, we are going to build a Corbelled building now. It is through a long time. So as I said, from early 1800s, they were still being built, 1880s, and still inhabited from there. So it was through a couple of decades that they learned. Yeah.
Jill, thanks, Jenna, really interesting. Tell me, why is the problem if it is a clay brick? Why is Pat upset if it's actually?
No, it was a shame. It's not that big of a deal. When we were excavating it, I was like, yo, it's a mud brick. Simon's like, that's a mud brick. We were like, that's cool. It had the shape, it had all of this. And Pat just said, I don't think it's that. So that's why it's contested. It wasn't really a fist fight or anything.
No, I'm asking about what's the relevance. I didn't.
Oh, so
Just make you a bit confused.
yeah, okay. That's not so. With the mud brick, we would assume it would have been a building material of sorts, because there are so many little aspects of Rondawels, and we actually don't know. Maybe there were earlier things with mud bricks. But I think that's also why Pat wasn't convinced, because why are we only finding 1.5? There was a half, it wasn't intact. Yeah, I think it was just that, is that there wasn't really enough evidence to suggest that it could be a mud brick. Maybe it was just really just how the soil compacted in that section. But it isn't of any relevance at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to find a little bit of history from the family that I married into, Vuyiswa. Now, my father-in-law's ancestor was born in 1812 in the UK area from missionary families. And my father-in-law, as a boy, now he was born in 1907, so quite a while later. As a child, he went to live with his grandmother in the Searist. And that's very much, towards Botswana in the west, quite remote. And he used to tell the story that this ancestor of his, Afrikaner, and they were not really happy living under British rule, all their rules and regulations. And some of them were sort of politically active and spent a few months in jail and so on. So from that area, Afrikaners trekked west. And my father used to say, and they established he identified a piece of land, others were already there. And when he found a piece of land that he could occupy, they were all happy. He came back and fetched his family, and they settled there. And my father-in-law used to comment, well, the reason why they went so far away from the coast and everything where the British colonials were very active, the British rule. And he said, he used to say, they did that to get as far as they could from the very British.
Yeah. It is. No, it is.
That's a reason
Yes.
why
100%.
they would go to such a godforsaken place.
Yeah.
They just wanted to get as far away as they could.
Yes, and that's why the trappers did move. They wanted to go farm, not under such strict rules and laws. Yeah.
Any other questions?
In the title deeds and the documents relating to the farm, is there mention of the population on the farm and possibly of trekkers or other groups of people that are working on the farm?
Not really. So they are
On
wills.
the end of point.
Yeah. So we have found the wills of Ian de Fontaine, a few of them from Gerhardus who lived there. But again, that is just him saying he updates this will to give to his wife, the many wives that he had throughout the years. And even in the inventory, it did not list indentured peoples or slaves in, as it is a little bit later as well. So we don't actually know from written documents who was living there and how. Well, we know who, but not how many people were there. We do know that there was a daughter and that she married someone else and that she obtained one of the farms. So there was a lot of obtaining farms through marriage, and there was quite a bit of, not intermarriage, but it is quite a small group out there. So a lot of people were marrying and putting their daughters to marry. And yeah, so we can't say there were 10 laborers there. As archaeologists, all we can do is assume from what we find. So another assumption that we do have, because of when it was, we in the late 19th century, early 20th century, is that we are saying maybe there was a military garrison there during the Anglo-Boer War. Because we found so much fauna, I mean, when I say it was bags and bags and bags, and we do think it is a dumping event, we think that maybe a group of military men were staying there for a little bit, ate a little bit, went on their way. But again, we can't really find documents about that. It really is under-documented over there. But if that answers, it's a little long-winded, but yes.
You mentioned like the possibility of there being a military garrison there. Have you guys like plotted, were there battles there, or was it like just a case kind of?
It was sort of, we found a few things and made an assumption. So the fauna was really a big thing of that. We know different people were occupying the site. So we do think, if I go back to, let me find, sorry, just going to the aerial photography. So we know that people were in here. And then on the cliff over here, you can't see it now. No, it's not in this picture. But there are little, there are scatterings or scars of little huts, little, also stone huts along the hill. Again, there's a lot to look at here, but we think that that could also be linked to sheep shearers, could be just to people passing through, helping out the farmers or the babe winners. There's also a big kraal there. So we said the size of the kraal is so big to be associated with this. I mean, the kraal is like, you know, it's quite big, and there are two of them. Another assumption could be that these are babe winners living on Ian de Fontaine, and just looking after the sheep of the main farmers. So with the military thing, we are just, it's coincidence, it's assuming because of the time, because of fauna, it's, you know, all arrows point there, but more needs to be done to, you know, that's what we're doing. We're just assuming, yeah.
What were in fact the incident of some kind of military activity? Bullets?
So we did find a few bullet casings, but it is still an active farm, and it has been. I mean, then there are game on the farm. I think it was it kudu? Yeah, it could be that, but there wasn't a lot of shell casings. So again, we just were saying the fauna. Simon really is interested in fauna, so we're saying it's, yeah.
Shell cases with weapons.
Yeah, so it was some shotgun casings. Yeah, but we didn't find any, you know, evidence of a battle. We didn't really find somewhere where people would hide behind something. It is just a very interesting, complex site. And I mean, complex. No. Oh, well, a little bit along the path. Is that what you were going to say, Nigel? So there is along this path that way. Were you going to speak about that other little square structure?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Nigel. Okay, let me first speak on that. We don't think it was a graveyard per se, but along this road back towards the main gate that we passed through, there was another rectangular square structure with some stones actually, with that kind of, I don't even know how to explain it, but vertically up along with the horizontal stones. So overgrown, we couldn't really understand it. We do still want to go back because we were there for just under 2 weeks in November 2023. We don't think it's a graveyard, but a lot of the farms in the area do have the graveyards associated with the main houses. And
That's for the owners.
that's also the thing. Yeah, so it's a tough one. We didn't find any gravestones. Yeah, so that's how I can answer that. Yeah, sorry, Nigel. Now
What I was going to ask is, you don't think from the dates and the large growls, it would be something to do with the first possible boom?
it could be as well. So for us was definitely wool boom. And this could be ostrich boom. It's just, it's an interesting place because we didn't find, I don't think we would find ostrich bones, but the majority of bones are sheep and goats. And it's just a lot of sheep and some goat, but it is mainly sheep. So that's where our assumptions are taking us. We didn't find any other relevant bones. I mean, I don't even think we found tortoise, cow. We did find some cattle, yeah. But as I said, the majority was sheep. So that was the direction that we were taking, yeah. Yes. I probably did sell them, yeah. But we couldn't find any, that's the thing, even in the inventory, I don't think it mentions ostriches. It just mentions the household items. So, yeah. Yes, Kitty.
Was it, if it was like wet all year round? And on that, was there any evidence of them like utilizing it for food or sort of other resources?
We did find a lot of peach pits and nectarine pits. So we actually think that they could have grown peach and nectarine and those sort of trees. I mean, this area is still wet enough to, provide this tree with water. I mean, it's still looking very green. And when you go there, there wasn't water down there. We did go in November, but there's got to be enough underground even to still have this. So we do think it was wetter. Can't say how much. I don't do past environment. But from what we did find, we do think there could have been some fruit farming happening, which you need more water for. And also, why would you settle next to a place that's very dry? If you have sheep and people and multiple families, maybe, yeah. Yes.
Significance of paint, the white paint that you found in other sites.
Yes. Oh, I'm not.
You saw remnants of this one.
So we think it could be, or it could just be the type of stone. If you look here, they are this lighter stone. Let me see here. Actually, let me go to this one. Especially near the back, it could be. So Pat and I were still looking at that and saying whether or not we do think it had paint on it. In the front, not so much, but on the back, there are also some of those vertical stones that we think it's quite an interesting area that could have been a multi-use zone, and especially related with children. This area over here, wrong one, over here, is quite interesting because it is shorter. It's shorter stones just up to here. So it wasn't closed off, we don't think. And there's a little entrance over there. It could be used for little bits of farming, but I don't know. But there's the walls here that did have some white paint. A lot of it was aesthetic, if I'm correct, but I'm not the expert on the painted Corbelled buildings. Apologies. Just on Rondawels. Yes, Patricia. Did you know about the paint?
So thinking about the structure.
Yes.
I do also feel like I should point out that isotopes is historical.
Incredible. Come on over, Patricia.
If you excavate again or something, do you think it'd be worth doing like micromorphology? In Europe, they do a lot of work on floor spaces to understand the use of space in houses.
Yes.
So like that, the lower wall might be if they're keeping east or something like that, that you would see down and past
Yeah.
on that. Or the calls, you could look at the dung analysis to see if it was.
It could be 100%. I think just the assumption we made is that it wasn't necessarily for small animals because we had those big crawls. But again, it could be another possibility. But because on the landscape in the previous picture, that I don't have, I wish I put it up here, but because we have a bigger crawl and then a smaller one, and then so many things along the cliff face, we do think that that was the area for farming. But again, there can be any possibilities that could have, that this, apologies, that this area was for small game. It is something that I can put forward, but yeah, we did also want to dig in the house, where we were staying and where we were having lunch and breakfast and everything in the main Corbelled building. It was actually quite lifted because of all the soil that had been deposited there. And I think if we had a little bit more time, we may have done just a little area to see if we could find anything, because we were finding, it wasn't little bones per se, we were finding little things, but it could have been quite modern because, as I said, a lot of the herders and stuff were using these buildings in recent years just for a sleepover and then carrying on with the sheep. So we don't want to mix modern with historical, but yeah, lots more to be done. It's not finished at Rondawels. Yes.
It's my last bit.
No.
Do you guys have any idea of whether they were cooking inside or
Yes.
outside? Or?
So they had a kitchen inside. So this is the entrance to the kitchen. It's to the right. And in one of the panoramas, this is actually where they were cooking. There was actually a wooden beam across here. And then through the back over here, I'm not sure if you can see, there's stones filling a section. When you are at the back of the house over there, you can actually see some remnants of heat over there. So they were cooking inside 100%. We do think that this could have been a kitchen as well. It's just so degraded, we can't really tell. We couldn't find a wooden beam there, but it would make sense for this complex to have two kitchens. As we know, in the past with gender roles, one kitchen equals one woman equals one family. So we do think that there were two families here occupying maybe this one as a whole and then this one as a whole. So they definitely were cooking inside. And then there was a little bit of an area out there where there could have been a fireplace. Yeah, and then also we know this is the kitchen from all the evidence, but because the midden was back here and people would throw their things away from the kitchen behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, you used the term creolized in the beginning. What did you mean by that?
Creolization, the mixing, the amalgamation of different peoples together. So with historical archaeology of South Africa, previous thoughts and studies thought people to not be mixing together, to not be creating families, creating units, having children. But this is the complete opposite. People were meeting and exchanging thoughts, exchanging, back in those days, numbers in terms, and having children together, having families. So creolization is used in that term of the mix of different cultures, different ideas, different ethnicities, different races, different religions. The Cape and the Northern Cape were just a hub of Indigenous people, colonial groups, everyone just coming together. Yes, there was a lot of fighting and there were a lot of deaths, but we do also need to remember the good part of it, the sharing of ideas. So yeah, that's what I mean. Does that make more sense? Yeah. Yes.
Other question?
Was there any work or understanding of how far the harvesting site for the stone would have been from where they were? I know that that's some reading, it's normally about like 1 or 2 kilometers, or quite close to riverbeds and so.
So it's not too far. We do think a lot of it could have come from the cliff. So I keep going back to the same picture, but we do think a lot of it's coming from here. Along the road as well, we were going over hills with little crevices. So back this way, lots of cliff faces with pieces of stone off of it. So we do think that it was fairly close. Yeah.
Quite evident, just driving around.
I would say so, yeah.
Like that's definitely work, that's just natural degradation?
I can't comment on, I'm not a geologist. I can't comment too much on that. But I can say with some certainty it was from those areas, I do think, because with the slabs that were at Rondawels, I don't think people were carrying those. We were putting those on carts and things for very long. It was a lot, because especially it is a massive complex. Yeah. Yes.
This is broad, but so you kind of could date the like Rondawels into like SG diagrams and like stuff we found. Is there like a timeline for Corbelled houses? Do they know they kind of start from this part of the Nile and it's spread? Because it's obviously like I don't think it's a natural building style. It has to like be passed on.
So it is. It does start in more the southern region. So Troy Smuts, in his dissertation, looked at title deeds along with Corbelled buildings, and they do follow a sort of chronology towards more of the north of the Northern Cape in that area. That is something that I am exploring for historical background, but it is that. And we do also move from the round-based Corbells to more of a square base through time as well. So that is the techniques being used and being updated or things like that. But there is that sort of chronology that we can do with the building style. Complexes also came a little bit later. So Pat does want me to look at all the title deeds or choice mat stuff. Yeah, he has a good map if you want to go read it. Yeah.
And then is there like an improvement association with like the Corbelled houses and like Italy, like other countries, or is it kind of like you don't know again?
James Walton thought so. It's a bit tough here, Nigel.
I have a theory.
Yeah.
But if you look at the Corbelled buildings in Southern Ireland, they're very, very similar to a lot of the Corbelled buildings in Libya. And if you look at the 1820 settlers, a lot of Irish stonemasons from that area arrived in Clan William and married farmers' daughters. So it's a possibility.
Yeah.
That's right. That's my theory. A lot of people don't like it, so it's a theory.
Yeah.
No one's come up with a better one.
That's the thing. So that's what we are. Yes.
But obviously, Walton is at the height of apartheid or trying to establish white identity in South Africa. So whatever lens you're looking at, you're not seeing straight.
That's the thing. So because the research was influenced by the era and the government of the time, James Walton did great work. We cannot diminish his work at all, but he did have a bias, and the bias was from the apartheid government saying, go find a white European identity. So what I can say to that is that there are many possibilities. It's a good theory as well. My theory sometimes, not always because I have a differing mind about it, is similar to that of pyramids and ziggurats and things all over the world, is that humans will build something no matter where they are. You know, that the bases, you know, like Inca, things like that, people were building that all around the world without that interaction or without saying, you have to create this. I think sometimes it's human nature, sometimes it is the sharing of ideas. What's sometimes tough about archaeology is we'll never truly know, but we do what we can with the evidence that we have.
And of course, if you want to be wonderful Corbelled, it's we have students in my city on Vietnamese. There's the name of what happened in the day, 1000 BC, 1000, I can't remember now. So those are quite amazing. So it comes a long way. Dylan, thank you so much. I think you know most of us knew a bit about Corbelled buildings, but I think you've given us insights that we couldn't have imagined, and particularly the human side. And I've heard things tonight that I've never heard before. So good luck with the rest of your research.
Thank you.
And when you produce your masters, maybe some of us would like to read it.
Definitely.
This is something to.
Thank you so much. I'll be around if anyone wants to ask more questions. Yeah, unless we are finishing. Oh, can I get in the one in the front? Hey, John, I'm so happy you're here. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, but to make sense of
Yes, so we do explore that with this I think it's the Botswana, the late Iron Age ones. We do mention it in it. Yeah, it was just this voice. Yes.
become frozen.
Yeah, but they do have that similar structure. Yeah.
They are from
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Thanks, John. Thanks for coming. Oh, this. Must I turn it off? Wait, let me quickly stop recording. Hey guys, I don't know how to work things. Just wait. Here, wait. Stop recording. Stop. Should be. I think it's stopped.